If you were wondering how the Trump campaign is handling Democrats' massively successful DNC, you might want to take a look at Trump's campaign spokeswoman, Carolyn Levitt.
Watching night one of the DNC was like watching an alternative reality. There was no mention of the migrant crime epidemic that has been allowed to transpire because of Kamala Harris's job as border czar, her open border policy. There was no mention of the record high inflation crisis caused by the Harris-Biden administration's economic policies. It's almost like the Democrats want the American people to forget that Kamala Harris has been vice president over the past 4 years and is wholly responsible for the economic, immigration, and foreign policy crises that we face in this great country. And, you know, the Democrats kept saying last night, we don't want to go back. Go back to what? 1.4% inflation, $1.50 gasoline, peace in the Middle East, the most secure border in history. Those are the facts of the Donald Trump administration, and millions of Americans do want to go back to those times.
Yeah, that's when it's clear that they're not actually taking the trajectory of this race well. But if she wants to talk about those things, let's talk about those things, because Republicans have been trying to shoehorn those lines into the zeitgeist. She starts off by talking about the migrant crime epidemic. First of all, for posterity, migrants commit crime at a much lower rate than native-born Americans. So if Republicans were actually focused on reducing crime as opposed to just fear-mongering about brown people, they might want to refocus their attention a bit. And by the way, if we really want to talk about crime rate, it's not a blue state problem, it is a red state problem. According to Third Way, which, to be clear, is no liberal bastion of an outlet, the red state murder rate was 33% higher than the blue state murder rate in both 2021 and 2022. 2022 was the 23rd consecutive year that murders plagued Trump voting states at far higher levels than Biden voting states, and 8 of the 10 states with the highest murder rates in 2022 voted for Trump in both 2016 and in 2020. Something that Carolyn Levitt might want to think about. But second, and most importantly, if the Trump team is that worried about migrant crime, why did Donald Trump tank the border bill? It was negotiated by Republican Senator James Lankford, and yet Trump was so desperate for this issue not to be solved so that he could wield it as a cudgel against Democrats that he ensured that his own party would kill it. And lo and behold, here are Republicans doing exactly that, using the issue of the border that they preserved as an issue to attack Democrats with. These people do not care about solutions, they care about entrenching problems to help themselves politically. Levitt then delves into inflation, which is an interesting strategy considering A, inflation was a global phenomenon coming out of COVID, and B, the US under Biden and Harris managed it extraordinarily well, with inflation at around 2%. In fact, on the issue of high prices, Trump came out at his little Bedminster press conference and, in response to high prices, blamed the Democrats, despite the fact that the high prices are the direct result of retailers who are now raking in record profits.
Kamala is reportedly proposing communist price controls. She wants price controls. And if they worked, I'd go along with it too, but they don't work. They actually have the exact opposite impact and effect. But it leads to food shortages, rationing, hunger, dramatically more inflation.
His comments coming as inflation hits a 3-year low.
And so, in effect, far from holding them to account, he's actually giving them cover by refusing to blame them for what they're doing. Instead, he's actually benefiting from them by assigning their blame onto the Democrats, meaning they get to continue raising prices and screwing over Americans because they have no reason not to. They know their behavior will simply be attributed to Democrats by self-serving politicians like Trump. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris came out the very next day at her own event and said in no uncertain terms that she'll hold the price gougers to account, the people actually responsible for the high prices.
When I am elected president, I will make it a top priority to bring down costs and increase economic security for all Americans. As president, I will take on the high costs that matter most to most Americans, like the cost of food. We all know that prices went up during the pandemic when the supply chains shut down and failed. But our supply chains have now improved, and prices are still too high. A loaf of bread costs 50% more today than it did before the pandemic. Ground beef is up almost 50%. Many of the big food companies are seeing their highest profits in 2 decades. And while many grocery chains pass along these savings, Others still aren't. Look, I know most businesses are creating jobs, contributing to our economy, and playing by the rules. But some are not. And that's just not right. And we need to take action when that is the case.
So tell me, if Donald Trump is that concerned about high costs, then why is he giving cover to the people responsible for the high costs? Maybe because he's not concerned with helping Americans, he is concerned with helping himself. And then, of course, Carolyn Leavitt complains that Democrats have taken up the rallying cry of, "We're not going back," and she clutches her pearls over the notion that Democrats would dare even suggest that Donald Trump's years aren't worth going back to. And she literally says that gas was $1.50. Yeah, I wonder why. I wonder if that might have had anything to do with the fact that the country was plunged into a global pandemic and, because of our piss-poor leadership, had 20% of the world's cases and deaths despite having only 5% of the world's population. Imagine having the worst response in the world to COVID and thinking that the fallout is something to brag about. The fact is that Republicans do not know how to respond to what the Democrats are doing right now, which is harnessing the energy from a fired-up coalition of Americans who don't want any part of Donald Trump's dystopian fever dream. They don't want the cynicism and negativity, the fear porn and revenge. But because Trump is so undynamic, he doesn't know how to do anything else. He is the epitome of when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so when he sees that something isn't working, he just keeps doing that thing. What is it they say about the definition of insanity? The fact is that when Trump and his mouthpieces attack, all it's doing is further exemplifying the difference between these two campaigns. One is looking toward the future, offering a vision for Americans on healthcare, on reproductive rights, on gun safety, on climate change, on education. Meanwhile, all the Trump team can do is attack. And so attacks like these don't move the needle. All they do is entrench the very difference that has been hurting the Republicans thus far. This is what you get when you have a campaign steeped so deeply in chaos and negativity. They're never going to be able to pull themselves out. So look, I'm perfectly happy to have Carolyn Leavitt come out on air and make these lame attacks. They are perfectly easy to rebut, and they just offer one more proof point about exactly the kind of campaign that Donald Trump is running. One where he lies as easily as he breathes, one where he embraces despair, one where he exploits the pain and suffering of Americans to help himself. His shtick might have worked in 2016. It's not working today. I've got a really exciting announcement. I've written a book. It's called Shameless. This book explores how Republicans have exploited their historical branding while attacking our democracy, how the media has proven itself a willful participant, and how Democrats can learn from this to rebalance the political scales and save our democracy. It has been a lifelong dream of mine to write my own book, and so I'd like to ask you to pre-order it by clicking the link right here on the screen. And if you buy within this pre-order period, your book is going to come with a signed nameplate. As you know, I've never had a single sponsor on my channel. I don't ask for money or anything like that, but if you're looking for a way to support me, this is hands down the best way to do it. So again, follow the link right here on the screen, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for pre-ordering Shameless. And as always, make sure to subscribe to see more of my content.